You never think your life can crumble in a single second. You walk around with this blind faith that things, no matter how rough they get, will somehow work out because you've built something solid. That's the lie I lived with for years until one morning when my wife, Caroline, woke up alone at dawn, checked her phone, and found a message that destroyed everything we ever had. But let me back up a little. Caroline and I had been married for almost 12 years. From the outside, people thought we were the perfect couple. We both had good jobs, me in construction management, her in marketing. We had a nice house in the suburbs, 2 dogs, and enough vacation photos to fill 5 albums. We had arguments like everyone else, but nothing that ever felt fatal. At least that's what I thought. Over the past few months, though, I noticed subtle shifts. She was glued to her phone at weird hours. She started going out more often, claiming she needed space to breathe and time with friends. I tried to be supportive. I even convinced myself that maybe I was being paranoid. I told myself everyone deserves a life outside their marriage. But sometimes what you ignore in the name of trust ends up being the noose around your own neck. The night before it all went down, she said she was going to stay over at her best friend Jenna's place because they had a girls' wine night. I didn't argue. I kissed her goodbye and even joked that she better not get too drunk. She laughed, carefree as ever, and drove off. I stayed home, ordered pizza, played some video games, and tried to shake off the unease gnawing at the back of my mind. But here's the thing, I wasn't completely stupid. Part of me knew something was off. So before she left, without her noticing, I placed a tiny Bluetooth tracker in the lining of her purse. It wasn't out of nowhere. I'd bought it weeks earlier when she first started acting shady. I told myself I wouldn't use it unless things got worse. That night, I decided it was time. Around midnight, I checked the app connected to the tracker. My blood turned cold. Caroline wasn't at Jenna's. She was across town at a hotel near the freeway. I stared at the blinking dot on my phone, willing it to be wrong, but it didn't move. It sat there like an accusation. I sat in the dark for an hour, wrestling with myself. Should I confront her, drive over there, and catch her in the act? Call her and demand answers? My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would break through my chest. In the end, I chose none of those. I decided to wait. I needed more than suspicion. I needed undeniable proof. If my marriage was about to be burned to the ground, I wanted her to be the one holding the matches. I stayed awake all night. Just before sunrise, my phone buzzed. The tracker showed she was on the move, heading back toward home. I set the bait. I texted her a simple message. Hey, hope you had fun. Love you. Then I waited. She walked through the door around 6:30 a.m., looking exhausted, wearing the same clothes she'd left in. She kissed me on the forehead like nothing had happened and mumbled something about a crazy night. I smiled, pretending not to notice the smudged lipstick and the faint smell of cologne that wasn't mine. She collapsed into bed without even taking off her makeup. I stood there in the kitchen, my hands shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had already sent the real message, scheduled it to arrive on her phone exactly 2 minutes after she fell asleep. It was a screenshot of the tracker app, location history and all. No words, just cold, brutal evidence. When she woke up alone at dawn and checked her phone, she found the one message that ended everything. And that's where the real story begins. When I heard her gasp from the bedroom, I knew she had seen the message. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then the creak of the bed, the shuffle of her feet on the hardwood floor, and finally her voice, sharp and full of panic. "Jason, what is this?" she screamed, storming into the kitchen, phone clutched in her shaking hand. Her hair was a mess, makeup smeared, and her voice cracked in a way I had never heard before. It wasn't anger, it was fear. I didn't even look up from my coffee. I kept stirring it slowly, deliberately, as if her world wasn't falling apart right in front of me. "You tell me," I said calmly. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It's not what you think. Jenna, she stumbled over her words, trying to build a lifeline out of lies. But the truth was a riptide she couldn't swim against. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a long screech. I pulled out a second phone, the burner I had bought a few days ago. I tapped a few times, and a second message hit her phone. A photo. Not just any photo. It was her at the hotel bar, sitting way too close to some man I had never seen before. His hand was on her thigh. She wasn't pushing it away. Her face went pale. "Jason, please listen," she begged, stepping forward. But I held up my hand to stop her. "I listened for months, Caroline. Listened to your excuses. Listened to you lie right to my face. Not anymore." She sank into a chair, sobbing now. Real ugly crying. Part of me, the old me, wanted to go to her, comfort her, fix everything. But the man standing there that morning was someone else. Someone who had been lied to, disrespected, made into a fool. "I love you," she choked out. I almost laughed. "You love me," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "Love doesn't look like a cheap motel and a stranger's hands on your body." I walked past her toward the hallway. She tried to follow me, grabbing my arm. That's when I dropped the final bomb. "I'm not staying," I said quietly. "I already packed my bags. You can explain this to your family, your friends, and Jenna too, since I sent them all the screenshots." Her face contorted in horror. "You didn't, Jason. Please. You can't." But I already had. A group text. Every close friend, her parents, even her boss. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story and paint me as the villain. Not this time. When I stepped outside, I felt the cool morning air hit my face like a baptism. My pickup truck was already loaded with everything I needed. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I didn't even look back. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw her through the living room window, collapsed on the floor, screaming silently. Maybe I should have felt sad. Maybe I should have felt empty. But I didn't. I felt free. The only thing I didn't know yet was how deep her betrayal really ran, or how much more there still was to uncover. Because that message she found? It was just the first domino to fall. I spent the next 2 days holed up in a cheap roadside motel an hour away from home. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me the space I needed to think and to plan. I wasn't going to let this end with a dramatic walkout and some tears. No, I needed to know everything. I needed every single ugly truth she thought she had buried. The worst part wasn't just that she cheated. It was the sickening realization that I didn't even know when it had started, or with who or how many. The Caroline I thought I married didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did. My phone buzzed nonstop. Dozens of missed calls. Hundreds of texts. Half of them were apologies. Half were desperate attempts to explain. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on digging, and what I found made my blood run colder than I thought possible. First, Jenna cracked. After I sent her the screenshots, she texted me a rambling confession. Turns out Caroline wasn't with just one guy. There were others, plural, different names, different places. Some were flings during girls' nights out. Some were full-blown affairs that lasted months. One was a coworker from her old job. Another was a guy she met at the gym. There was even a neighbor, a guy we had BBQs with who had smiled in my face while sleeping with my wife behind my back. I read the texts with a hollow pit in my stomach. Every detail Jenna spilled was like another knife. Hotel names, dates, conversations she overheard. Times when Caroline had lied to my face with that sweet smile, saying she was too tired or working late. My entire marriage had been a house of cards built on rotten foundations. But Jenna's confession wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when she told me that some of Caroline's friends knew. Not all, but enough. They had seen her flirting at bars, leaving with men who weren't me. They just never said anything. After all, it wasn't their business. Loyalty wasn't to the truth. It was to the lie. Rage bubbled up inside me, but I didn't let it explode. I stayed calm, focused. I started reaching out quietly, talking to people she knew, pretending like nothing was wrong. And every conversation, every awkward pause, every nervous dodge of a question, gave me more clues. She was so arrogant, so sure that I would never find out, that she didn't even bother covering her tracks. I found hotel receipts she forgot to delete from her email. Uber rides to unfamiliar addresses. photos on her cloud storage that she thought were private. And then the final blow. A secret second phone bill tied to her name, a burner phone she had been using for months, maybe years, to arrange meetings I was never supposed to know about. I tracked the number down, and when I did, I saw text logs with more men than I could count. Flirty texts, explicit messages, even plans to meet when Jason's out of town. Some of the conversations made me sick to my stomach. Not just because of what she said, but because of how casual it all was for her, as if destroying our life together was no bigger deal than ordering a pizza. By the time I pieced it all together, I realized I had barely scratched the surface. This wasn't one mistake. This was a lifestyle. The woman sleeping under my roof wasn't who I thought she was at all. And the worst part? She was about to learn that her little world wasn't just crumbling. It was about to burn to the ground in ways she couldn't even imagine yet. Because I wasn't done. Not even close. I didn't go back home right away. I needed more. Not revenge, not some dramatic confrontation. I needed the full truth laid out clearly so that when I finally faced her, there would be no arguments, no denials, no second chances. I spent the next few days methodically pulling apart the life we had built together, thread by thread. Every account we shared, every subscription, every photo album we kept tucked away in closets. I went through it all. There were breadcrumbs everywhere, small cracks she thought she had hidden too well for me to ever notice. I found a hidden folder on our shared laptop, buried under layers of innocent files. Inside were dozens of pictures. Caroline dressed up, laughing at fancy restaurants, lounging in hotel rooms, sitting in strangers' laps like she didn't have a husband waiting for her at home. Some photos were time-stamped during nights she had sworn she was visiting her mother, who lived 3 states away. My stomach twisted seeing her like that, so casual, so carefree. It wasn't just betrayal. It was mockery. She had been living a double life so effortlessly while I was stupid enough to believe the lies spilling from her mouth. But it didn't end there. One evening, still sitting in my dingy motel room, I decided to call one of the numbers from the burner phone's contact list. I didn't know what I expected. A confused stranger, maybe someone denying everything. What I got instead made my skin crawl. A man answered, confident, relaxed, like he was picking up a call from an old buddy. "Hey, thought you weren't supposed to call this late," he said with a laugh. I stayed silent for a second, gripping the phone tighter. "Caroline sleeping?" he continued casually, misreading my silence. "Or pretending to be you coming over, or what?" My blood turned to ice. He thought I was someone else. One of them. He thought I was part of her secret world. A name she juggled like all the others. And just like that, with one careless assumption, he confirmed what I had suspected deep down. This wasn't about love or mistakes or loneliness. Caroline had created a second life built entirely around deceit. And she had done it so well that even her lovers thought there were more of them hidden in the shadows. I hung up without saying a word. It wasn't grief I felt anymore. It wasn't heartbreak. It was something colder. A final snapping inside me. The end of whatever illusions I still clung to about the woman I married. I spent that night mapping out my next steps carefully, not out of anger, but out of absolute clarity. Divorce was inevitable, but I wasn't going to slink away quietly. I wasn't going to let her spin some sob story to our families, our friends, about how things just didn't work out. No, she had forfeited the right to my silence the moment she chose cheap thrills over loyalty. I started gathering every piece of evidence into a single file. Every text, every receipt, every location ping, every damning photo. A digital war chest that left no room for doubt. And then I prepared my exit. Accounts were separated. My money was moved. My name was taken off anything that tied me to her. I called a lawyer, one who didn't play games and specialized in scorched earth divorces. I even found a new place to stay. A quiet cabin a few hours away where she wouldn't think to look for me when her world collapsed. But there was still one last thing I needed to do before disappearing. One final card to play. One that would guarantee that Caroline's carefully curated mask shattered beyond repair. And the perfect moment to play it was just a few days away. Her birthday. The day she thought she'd be surrounded by friends, family, and admiration. The day she thought she would be celebrated. Instead, it would be the day she was exposed. And I would be watching the whole thing unfold. The morning of Caroline's birthday, everything was set. I woke up early in the motel, grabbed a black duffel bag stuffed with everything I had prepared, and made the drive back into town. The air was thick and heavy, the sky overcast, like even nature sensed the storm brewing. She had no idea what was coming. She still thought she could cry her way out of this, spin her web of excuses and half-truths until I forgave her, or at least stayed silent to save face. She didn't understand that this wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was Judgment Day. Caroline's parents had organized a small party at their house. It was supposed to be a surprise, but she found out days earlier. Jenna had accidentally slipped. That worked perfectly for me. She expected a room full of friends, laughter, gifts, and attention. She expected to be adored. I intended to give her something she would never forget. I arrived a few minutes before she did. I greeted everyone politely, smiling, playing the part of the dutiful husband who was trying to make things work. Most of the guests smiled back, unaware of the powder keg they were standing on. I caught Jenna's eye across the room. She looked away quickly, guilt written all over her face. Good. Let her squirm. She deserved it, too. When Caroline finally walked through the door, she looked radiant. Freshly done hair, a dress that hugged her figure, makeup perfectly applied. She lit up when she saw everyone shout, "Happy birthday!" Her eyes darted around, looking for me. And when she found me standing near the dining room table, her smile faltered for just a split second, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. She must have wondered why I was here, standing so still, so calm. She had no idea that on the table behind me sat a large white box, wrapped neatly with a silver ribbon. She didn't know that it wasn't a gift. It was a grenade. After the initial excitement faded and people started mingling, I stepped forward, holding the box out to her. She looked genuinely touched, even wiping a tear from the corner of her eye as she took it. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "I know," I replied, my voice neutral. "But you deserve something special." The whole room turned to watch as she carefully untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. For a second, confusion flickered across her face. She reached in and pulled out a simple black folder. She looked at me, puzzled. I gestured for her to open it. Inside were dozens of printed photographs, screenshots of text messages, maps showing the hotel locations, copies of receipts, each one a nail driven into the coffin of her lies. The room went dead silent as she flipped through the first few pages. You could have heard a pin drop. Her face turned sheet white, her hands trembling. A low gasp escaped her lips as the truth unfolded in front of everyone she cared about. Someone in the crowd, maybe her father, asked, "What's going on?" She tried to speak, but no words came out. She dropped the folder, the papers spilling onto the floor like a bomb blast. Photos fluttered under guests' feet. Ugly secrets made horrifyingly real. A murmur spread through the room. People bent down, picking up the evidence, reading, understanding. And then the shouting started. Her mother was the first to raise her voice, disbelief and anger etched into every word. Friends who had once toasted to her happiness recoiled like they had touched a live wire. Even Jenna couldn't meet her gaze. Caroline turned to me, tears streaming down her face now, mascara bleeding onto her cheeks. "Please," she whispered, so broken, so desperate. "Please, we can fix this." I shook my head once, slow and final. "You didn't just break my heart, Caroline. You destroyed everything. And now you get to live in the wreckage you created." I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just turned around and walked out the front door, leaving behind the life that had already ended long before that day. I didn't need to stay and watch the collapse. It was already happening, and it was more complete, more devastating than anything I could have orchestrated on my own. As I got into my truck and drove away, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not happy, this wasn't about happiness, but free. Free from lies, from manipulation, from the endless waiting for someone to choose me over their own selfishness. Caroline had chosen herself, and now so had I, But what I didn't realize yet was that her betrayal ran even deeper than I had uncovered. There were still truths buried in the ashes and one more secret that would blindside me when I least expected it. In the days that followed, I stayed quiet. No posts on social media, no angry texts, no late-night phone calls. I let Caroline flail around in the mess she had created without giving her anything to cling to. I moved into the cabin I had rented, tucked away deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but the sound of the wind and my own thoughts. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't known for years, and for a while I thought the worst was behind me. I thought the final chapter of our story had been written when I walked out that door. But the thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always reveal itself all at once. Sometimes it waits, lurks, then strikes when you've finally begun to believe you're safe again. It started with a call from the bank. At first, I almost didn't answer. I didn't recognize the number, and I had no reason to expect anything good. But something told me to pick up. A woman with a clipped, professional voice introduced herself and asked if I could confirm some recent activity on my accounts. Confused, I asked what she meant. She listed off a series of transactions, large ones, wire transfers, thousands of dollars disappearing overnight. Money moved from our joint savings account, one I had thought was frozen the day I filed the divorce papers. I felt my blood pressure spike. "I closed that account," I said, trying to stay calm. There was a pause on the other end. "Sir," she said carefully, "the account was reactivated 3 days ago. Authorization came through via your wife's credentials. Technically, until the divorce is finalized, the account is still shared." I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there for a long moment, breathing heavily, trying to process what I had just heard. Caroline hadn't just destroyed our marriage. She hadn't just humiliated me in front of everyone we knew. She had stolen from me, again. After everything, that night I drove back into town. I parked outside the apartment where she had been staying. Her parents had kicked her out after the birthday disaster, and she'd found some tiny place on the bad side of town. I watched from a distance. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe I thought seeing her miserable would give me some closure. Maybe I thought I'd confront her, demand answers, force her to face what she had done. But what I saw made my stomach turn all over again. She wasn't alone. Standing outside her building was another man. Tall, athletic, confident. He laughed as he leaned in and kissed her. Not a shy kiss, not an awkward goodbye. A kiss that spoke of familiarity, comfort, intimacy. She clung to him like a lifeline. I watched in disbelief as they walked hand in hand back into her apartment. It hadn't even been 2 weeks. Less than 14 days since she'd stood sobbing on the floor, begging me to stay, telling me she loved me, swearing she would do anything to fix it. And here she was, already moving on, already slipping back into the same patterns that had destroyed us. Maybe she never grieved the loss at all. Maybe for her, there was never anything real to grieve. I sat there for a long time, watching the lights flicker in her window, feeling a strange kind of peace settle over me. Not anger, not even sadness, just acceptance. Caroline had shown me exactly who she was, and for the first time I truly believed her. The woman I had loved, fought for, sacrificed for. She had died a long time ago. Maybe she had never existed outside the fantasy I had built in my own mind. And now I was finally ready to bury that fantasy for good. But before I disappeared from her world forever, there was one last thing I needed to do. Something that would finally close this chapter and make sure she never had a way to pull me back into her chaos again. I wasn't going to get revenge. I was going to erase myself so completely that to her, it would be as if I had never existed at all. And she would have to live with that silence every single day. The next morning, as the sun rose over the thick pine trees surrounding the cabin, I sat at the small kitchen table with a black notebook in front of me. A single mug of cold coffee sat untouched by my elbow. I wasn't interested in caffeine. I was interested in finishing what Caroline had started, but on my terms, not hers. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want some dramatic scene where I screamed and she cried. I wanted something cleaner, final, something that would leave no doors cracked open. No strings trailing behind me for her to tug on later. The first thing I did was change my phone number. It wasn't enough to block her. I wanted no traceable link between us. Every call, every text, every voicemail she'd ever sent vanished with a single swipe. The second thing I did was visit my lawyer. We expedited the divorce filings. I agreed to terms that were cold, clinical, brutal. No discussions about reconciliation. No negotiations about property or shared belongings. If she wanted the house, she could have it. I didn't care anymore. It wasn't a home to me. It was a tomb filled with memories that made my skin crawl. I contacted my employer and arranged to transfer to a different state. A lateral move, no loss in salary, but it would put 1,000 miles between me and the wreckage of my old life. I started the process of changing my bank accounts, my mailing address, even my emergency contacts. Every shared subscription was canceled, every piece of mail redirected. I even went as far as to buy a new truck, selling my old one under a different name just to make sure she couldn't track me down out of some sudden fit of guilt or loneliness. Piece by piece, I dismantled the man she used to know, and the more I erased, the lighter I felt. Caroline, meanwhile, was spiraling. I knew it through the whispers that occasionally filtered through mutual friends or the few who dared reach out. She had lost her job 2 days after the birthday fallout. Apparently, the boss didn't appreciate being associated with a woman whose scandalous private life was making the rounds. Her parents cut her off financially, ashamed and furious. Most of her so-called friends vanished, not wanting to be caught in the blast radius. Even the man I saw her clinging to outside her apartment was just another temporary fix. He ghosted her less than a week later. But none of that mattered to me anymore. I didn't revel in her suffering. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel satisfaction watching her fall apart. It was just noise like distant thunder. I had built a new life in my mind already, brick by brick, and none of it included her. She was nothing but a chapter one had finished reading, a story that had ended in fire and ash. Still, one final encounter was unavoidable. I needed to face her one last time to make sure the door was truly closed. The court scheduled a mediation meeting, a requirement before the divorce could be finalized. It would be the first time I'd see Caroline face to face since the day she opened that birthday present and watched her world collapse. Part of me wondered if she would show. Part of me almost hoped she wouldn't, but she did. When I walked into that sterile office room, there she was, sitting at the long wooden table, smaller than I remembered, broken in ways I couldn't have imagined. Her hair was messy, her clothes too big, hanging off a frame that had clearly lost weight from the stress. She looked up when I entered, and for a second, her face lit up with a flicker of hope. She still didn't get it. She still thought there was a path back. "Jason," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please, can we talk? Just us." I sat down across from her, placing the folder of finalized papers on the table between us like a shield. I didn't smile. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't even blink. "There's nothing left to say," I said calmly. Her eyes filled with tears, but I stayed silent. No anger, no pity, just distance. The mediator ran through the formalities. Property division, debt assignments, financial disclosures. Caroline barely listened. She just kept staring at me as if willing me to say something different, something softer. But I didn't. I signed the documents in cold, clean strokes. When it was her turn, her hand shook so badly she had to steady it with her other one. The final signature dragged across the paper, shaky and broken. And just like that, it was over. We stood. She hesitated as if expecting a hug, a touch, anything. I walked past her without a glance. As I reached the door, I paused for one last moment, not because I doubted my choice, but because I wanted to mark it, to seal it in both our memories. Without turning around, I said, "Take care of yourself, Caroline." And then I left her there, standing in the ruins of the life she burned to the ground. I didn't look back. Not once. Driving away from the courthouse that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long, long time. Peace. Not a fleeting moment of distraction, not a numb acceptance of reality, but a deep, resounding peace that settled into my bones. I didn't blast music or call anyone to celebrate. I just drove, windows down, letting the warm breeze roll over me like a baptism. washing away the bitterness, the betrayal, the grief. Somewhere along the highway, with the endless stretch of road unfolding in front of me, it truly hit me. I was free. For years, I had lived in a cage I didn't even realize existed, built from misplaced trust and the desperate hope that love would be enough to fix what was broken. I kept sacrificing pieces of myself, trying to patch holes that had been there long before I even noticed them. But now there was nothing left to fix, nothing left to lose, only space to rebuild. This time, for me, I spent the next few months focusing solely on myself. I settled into my new cabin, finished furnishing it by hand, and started hiking again, something I hadn't made time for in years. Mornings were filled with crisp air, the scent of pine, and the sound of birds instead of the constant buzzing of unanswered texts. Evenings were spent sitting by the fire, reading books I never thought I'd have the time to finish, and learning how to enjoy my own company again. Some people think freedom after betrayal feels empty, like you've lost something too vital to survive. But the truth is, sometimes betrayal frees you from the version of yourself that was willing to settle for less than you deserved. I wasn't broken. I wasn't ruined. I was reborn. One Saturday morning, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I met someone new. It wasn't planned. And it wasn't some wild, movie-style romance. It was simple, honest. I was grabbing coffee in a small mountain town when a woman about my age, with kind eyes and an easy smile, accidentally bumped into me. We started talking, and there were none of the games, none of the masks or rehearsed lines, just two people finding something real in the middle of nowhere. Her name was Elise. She didn't know anything about my past. And for once, I didn't feel the need to spill it all at once. We took things slow. Dinners that stretched into long conversations, walks by the river, talking about dreams instead of old wounds. She wasn't trying to fill a hole or save me. She just met me where I was, someone rebuilding and someone ready for something genuine. For the first time in years, I looked toward the future and didn't feel fear or regret. I felt hope. Looking back now, I realized that morning when Caroline woke up alone, checked her phone, and found that one devastating message, it wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a better one. A life where loyalty wasn't a question. A life where peace wasn't temporary. A life where I chose myself fully and without apology. And when I think about everything I went through, everything I survived, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel gratitude, because sometimes the worst day of your life sets you free, and the sunrise that follows is brighter than you ever imagined.